See you Monday, 3:45.
Whakarongo mai koe ki te reo irirangi o Aotearoa. This is Checkpoint on RNZ National. I'm Lisa Owen. Haere Aki nei, is Tauranga a hotspot for racism? We asked the locals after Te Pāti Māori says threats, abuse and hate speech means it's unsafe for it to stand a candidate in the by-election. There's a whiff of rebellion in Bromley as residents suffering under the eternal pong of poo gear up to meet the mayor. How much are our youth worth? An extra $15 million over 4 years according to Budget 2022. So what does that buy? Baxter, the certified rat dog, is brought in to clear the last remaining pests on Miramar Peninsula, and the cost of living bites across the ditch. Almost 1 million Australians reckon they need to work multiple jobs to make ends meet.
RNZ News at 5. Ahi Marie, I'm Evie Ashton. New Zealanders have been warned to prepare for a resurgence of COVID-19 over winter. About 7,500 community cases were reported today, in line with the 7-day average, and hospitalisations have been relatively stable this week. However, officials are preparing for the numbers to climb again as people spend more time indoors over winter. Modelling suggests the number in hospital with the virus, just under 400 today, could top 1,000 over July and August. However, the Director-General of Health has ruled out reversing his resignation. Ashley Bloomfield, who's due to step down at the end of July, says the health system will cope without him.
I'm confident that we've got in the system, we've got the people, the processes and all the services in place to deal with another outbreak. Indeed, I won't be reconsidering my resignation.
Ashley Bloomfield says health officials are aiming to roll out a 4th dose of COVID vaccine to older people and other vulnerable groups next month. The Aged Care Association says it lobbied immigration officials to allow overseas nurses to be bonded to an employer for at least 2 years. Its chief executive, Simon Wallace, says it wasn't consulted on the government's new immigration settings, but met with officials in January. He says the 2-year work-to-residency pathway won't stop aged care nurses quitting their jobs.
If the visa could be tied to an employer in the aged care sector, we would have liked to have seen, 3 years even, because that provides continuity for our residents, stability for not only for the nurses but all our staff.
Allied health workers are threatening to strike again after rejecting an 11th hour offer from district health boards to settle their collective agreement. Their union, the PSA, claims the DHBs are blatantly disregarding recommendations from the Employment Relations Authority aimed at resolving the dispute. Organiser Will Matthews says the boards have also refused to let the union release the recommendations to members, who include anaesthetic technicians, oral health therapists and mental health workers. He says that without a guarantee of fair pay, 10,000 staff will vote on sustained strike action through June and beyond. A structural engineer says the case of a person with part of a degree impersonating an expert reinforces the need for tighter regulations. Prajna Singh has been censured and fined for signing off multiple projects as if she were a chartered professional engineer. Hamish McKenzie, who's the immediate past president of the Structural Engineering Society, says a tighter regime is on its way.
The Structural Engineering Society and Engineering New Zealand have been keen to see improvements in the occupational regulation of engineers, and associated with that is considerations of improvements around the Chartered Professional Engineers regime.
A resident of the Christchurch suburb of Bromley says a public meeting tonight will be a great chance to put some questions to the council about what is being done to reduce the stench pervading the area. The nearby burnt-out wastewater plant has been emitting a putrid smell since a fire in November. Don Gould says tonight's meeting at the Bromley Community Hall will give people a chance to speak directly to council representatives.
This is an opportunity for the community to ask some questions and get an update. Not everybody can make it to a council meeting, and some of these council meetings are hard to digest, and when you're sitting in them, you don't get the opportunity to ask a question.
The council has started work on tackling the problem, but Don Gould says it needs to work faster. To sport, and the Black Caps coach Gary Stead concedes the appointment of Brendan McCullum as England Test coach has caught him off guard. The former Black Caps skipper has signed with England for 4 years, and his first assignment is against New Zealand in a 3-test series next month. Stead believes the appointment reflects the ever-increasing value of New Zealand's cricket stocks.
Initially a little surprised to hear Brendan's name thrown around. I didn't know he was interested in that at all, but fantastic for him. I'm sure he will give that England team a real boost, and I guess it'll be strange having a familiar face sitting across the dugout there as well to compete against us.
Meanwhile, Black Caps spinner Ajaz Patel has raised $27,350 by auctioning off for charity one of the shirts he wore when he took all 10 wickets in an innings against India last year. And Crusaders coach Scott Robertson rates the Brumbies the best of the Australian Super Rugby sides and is rolling out his top lineup for tonight's clash in Canberra. All Blacks Scott Barrett and Cody Taylor both return for the match. With the Brumbies coming off wins over the Chiefs, Hurricanes and Highlanders, Robertson expects a vocal reception from the Canberra fans.
Feels like it's going to be a good bumper crowd. You know, they know the occasion's important for both teams. That's going to set us up for the rest of the season.
The Brumbies are second in the competition and the Crusaders third. Also tonight, the Highlanders play the Force in Dunedin. That's the news.
Tomorrow morning, the big winner of the Ockham Fiction Prize, Fisi Heriaka, who has reimagined the bird woman, Tauranga Tuku. Professor Kathleen Stock, bloodied but unbowed in the battle over trans rights. Biology rules, says the author of Material Girls. And Paul's brother Mike McCartney, a.k.a. Mike McGeer at the scaffold. Thank you very much. On his very early Beatles photographs. Call Kim Hillaho. Join me tomorrow morning here on RNZ National.
You're on Checkpoint with Lisa Owen next. Right now, the short forecast from Met Service to midnight Saturday. From Northland to Waitomo, including Coromandel, Bay of Plenty and Taupo. Fine today, cloudy periods tomorrow and isolated showers developing from Auckland southwards. For Gisborne and Hawke's Bay, mainly fine, some high cloud tomorrow. Taranaki to Kapiti, including Taumaru Nui and Taihape. A few showers developing tonight, turning to rain tomorrow afternoon. Wellington, Wairarapa, Marlborough and Nelson, fine, cloudy periods developing tomorrow, then scattered rain developing in the afternoon or evening. From Bulla to Fiordland, a few showers, rain with heavy falls developing in Fiordland tonight, then spreading north tomorrow. Fine today for Canterbury, a few spots of rain tomorrow morning with high cloud, and then there's patchy drizzle later with the cloud lowering. Mainly fine for Otago and Southland, but there's rain about Stewart Island spreading north tomorrow morning and then easing to isolated showers. And for the Chatham Islands, Rekohu, partly cloudy, a few showers tomorrow. It is coming up to 7 minutes past 5. I'll have news headlines for you at 5:30.
Nā mihi mō te rā iwi, tēnā koutou katoa, nau mai haere mai ki Checkpoint I tēnei rā, ko Lisa Owen tēnei. Te Pāti Māori won't stand a candidate in the upcoming Tauranga by-election due to safety concerns. The party says a string of racist incidents in the city, including a white supremacist leaflet drop, and death threats have led them to opt out of the race altogether, and in doing so protect their mana. Rawiri Waititi is the MP for Waiariki, the Māori electorate that takes in Tauranga, and he's also the co-leader of Te Pāti Māori. I asked him if he thinks Tauranga is a racist city.
Tauranga has very racist people within it. I wouldn't say the whole of Tauranga is racist. That's not an accurate call, but I can tell you what, it has become quite an unsafe space for Māori to be in. Hey, all you have to do is look in the last month with the pamphlet that dropped in Tauranga around proud to be white type pamphlets with that type of rhetoric coming out. I can tell you what, the person that threatened both mine and Debbie's life, and they put a video up on YouTube, threatened to burn 150 marae plus many of our Māori leadership within their homes by locking them from the outside. That person was in Papamoa. We've just had a lot of cordial come out from Stacey Rose, who is a regional councillor, talk about the racist slurs and the treatment he's been getting since receiving his tamoko, his mataora on his face. So there is a lot of evidence out there to show that Tauranga Moana has a growing number of racists living with it.
And do you feel that this electorate is worse than others, or are you going to not stand in some other areas that you have issues with too?
If there is a high percentage of Māori in those particular electorates, we may consider it. But at this particular time, our focus is on Tauranga, and Tauranga at this particular time is proving unsafe for Māori to run in any of those general spaces. We even know that, there's been videos of people get up at a council hui, public council hui, and to be to people in Māori, where they've been shouted down to say this is New Zealand and they should be speaking English. This is the racist rhetoric that's coming out of Tauranga Moana, and I'll make no apology for that.
Do you feel safe in Waiariki? Because that takes in Tauranga as well.
To be quite honest, I'm a big boy, and I can handle myself in those particular spaces. The Waiariki is very different. That is a very strong Māori, and I deal with the Māori constituents within Tauranga Moana, and I feel sorry for them. My apology is to them that they have to live amongst this. I feel absolutely safe in the Waiariki because my electorate has a strong Māori, is a very strong Māori constituent base. Tauranga Moana is a stronghold for the Waiariki seat, and is a power to be reckoned with when it comes to Waiariki issues and its support for its member. And so, absolutely, it's probably one of the most pro-Māori seats you've got out there, but unfortunately we're surrounded by electorates like Tauranga Moana that has a growing number of racists in it.
Rawiri, you are just outlining there that you feel safe in Waiariki because it has a high proportion of Māori. Does that mean Tauranga is too white?
Oh, I didn't say that.
No, I'm just wanting to clarify.
No. Tauranga, I see, has got a growing number of racists. And so that's exactly the reason why the Pāti Māori is not standing anybody in Tauranga Moana. And then I hear the candidate saying that the Pāti Māori should apologise to Tauranga. I apologise to Tauranga, but I apologise to the iwi of Tauranga who have to live amongst a growing number of racists within their township.
I notice Te Pāti Māori is quoting the Department of Internal Affairs report published in April that says hate speech from white supremacists on social media is the largest form of hate speech in this country. And then you go on to say Tauranga is a hotspot. How are you drawing the connection between that report from Internal Affairs and Tauranga? Because Tauranga is not specifically mentioned in that report at all.
No, I've just told you what the evidence is that I've quoted a number of reasons why we believe that it is a hotspot. The many messages we get on social media through emails has come from places like Tauranga Moana. The threat to the lives of both Debbie and I and our family and 150 marae across the country came from Tauranga, came from a person in Pāpāpā. So we have the evidence. The shouting down of one of our Māori wahine at a public council hui for doing a mihi in Māori and welcoming everybody it happened in Tauranga. The racist leaflets that were dropped in Tauranga Moana happened in Tauranga. So we have the evidence there to show there is a growing number of racists in Tauranga Moana, which actually does make it a hotspot.
So, Rawiri, would you accept that they are a very small percentage of that electorate?
Well, if it is, then the rest of Tauranga Moana need to hold them accountable. There shouldn't be a fight for Māori to have to stick up for themselves.
I understand your point. It's not your job to fix these people because it's their problem. I understand that. But what about the good people of Tauranga who might want you to stand a candidate in there? What do you say to them?
Well, my thing
and
is,
bringing your kaupapa to them.
Can they reassure that it is going to be a safe space in those particular areas? I don't think so. Not at this particular time. Not the rhetoric that's been coming out over the last few months. And I'm talking only a few months. It has increased immensely that type of behaviour across Tauranga Moana. And I apologise to those who believe in Te Pāti Māori's kaupapa, but we must keep people, our whānau, safe at this particular time. It may be something we need to work on as a nation.
Rawiri, is this the only reason that Te Pāti Māori is not standing a candidate in this particular electorate? Can you rule out that finances is not part of this, that there aren't any other issues at play here?
Oh, no, we had people interested in standing, all right, but it was our
Did you have the money to stand a candidate, Rawiri?
Absolutely, and we had people that were ready to go. And so
the sole
we
reason...
had to make a decision around ensuring that Pāti Māori kaupapa would not be belittled by these racist type ideologies that are coming out of Tauranga. Unfortunately, that's just the way it is.
Te Pāti Māori co-leader and Wairiki MP Rawiri Waititi, and we'll have an extended version of that interview on the Checkpoint page. Homai o whakaro, we'd love your feedback. Nō reira anei na kaupapa mō te hōtaka nei. Have Te Pāti Māori got a fair point here? Do you think there are other factors at play in this decision not to stand a candidate? Let us know your thoughts. Particularly like to hear from you if you are in that Tauranga electorate. Text me, Pātui Mai, 2101, tweet us at Checkpoint RNZ, or you can email checkpoint@rnz.co.nz. A new retailer in Glen Innes says he no longer feels safe mere months after opening a business in the Auckland suburb. It follows several smash and grabs and ram raids in the area, with some worried retailers deciding to reinforce shop frontages to keep the crims out. Meanwhile, a local family centre says staff are working overtime to try and keep kids on the straight and narrow. Nick Trubridge and cameraman Nick Monroe report from Auckland's east.
You can see the damage here, all damage wall. So you can see that it's all damage and damage inside. Everything damaged at the moment, bro.
It's been anything but a warm Glen Innes welcome for Vikas Thakur.
We feel unsafe at the moment, like they're using the car at the moment. But think, if we walk inside and they crash, because we open late night, 10 o'clock. And for me and my neighborhood, I feel unsafe.
3 months after opening the doors of the local liquor centre, they've been smashed in. Ram raiders striking twice last Saturday morning, splitting walls, demolishing the front door and leaving the new owners rattled.
Shocked, man. Like, I tried to open my eyes 2 or 3 times because I came here at 9 o'clock in the morning time, and I tried to, shocked. I see, my door is broken, or it's my eyes.
The result? Well, smashed shop, battered nerves aside, Mr Thakur lost 2 days trading. Not ideal when you've got liabilities. And a fix won't come quickly.
They're going to take 2 or 3 months for fix all the wall, and there's no security.
And he's not alone. Mere metres around the corner, a pawn shop targeted on Tuesday morning. Its frontage boarded up, a sight growing more common in these parts.
I love Glen Innes, nice people here, but every community has some few people, so can't complain about that.
Youths, some not even teenagers, are among those behind a spate of brazen ram raids and attempted heists. So what's behind the trend? What causes kids so young to drift towards crimes that terrorise the likes of Vikas Thakur and his neighbours?
A lot of poverty, there's not much money in the home, but there's not much time from the parents going into the development of the child. So a lot of that is missing, the children are sort of just going through the motions of being a child, but they haven't got their parents' support behind them.
While all the numbers suggest youth crime is down overall, Glen Innes Family Centre manager Chris Makuare and his team remain hard at work. They're the help at the top of the cliff, preventative, Mr Makuare says, while telling us about some of the kids in the centre's 8-week Mana Rangatahi programme.
It's one child, he's really clever, but you can see he can be a handful at school because what they're teaching him is just under his level. And I says, we're going to get this kid into a private school, because then he will be something. But if he won't, he will follow his brother, and his brother's gone down that track there, and his brother's in youth juvenile and all sorts of stuff.
So how can we stop kids, some as young as 7, getting in a car, ramming a shop and stealing products?
I still come back to trying to empower the parents or resource the parents to build a good relationship with that young person so we can prevent them from being in that position. So they've got all the resources they need to have to get their kid, the child, active, and even to be able to, make sport free. let them join whatever they want, and it doesn't cost anything.
Back at the Glen Innes shops, the results of failing to keep kids straight are there for all to see. The frontage of Sally Lee's GI discounter is partially smashed, and she relies on a security alarm under the counter if there's trouble brewing.
Quite often, like maybe one or two times a week. Yeah, so I have to stay at my CCTV.
Her shop looks more like Fort Knox than a dairy and vape store, bars behind the windows. She stands behind a counter barricaded from floor to ceiling.
When it's getting dark, it's not safe here. Yeah, and my car, I always park after work. I have to park it far away because, this area is not so safe.
The store's frontage is covered with pictures of young people caught in the act. The crimes often appear petty, swiping some chocolates, grabbing a Coke, lunging for lollies. But Chris Makaware says these kids can be saved before the crimes become more severe, and sometimes it's the little things.
I even say to my staff, I says, you get in his ear, take him for, so the resources that he will need is just to be able to go and take him to McDonald's and be able to talk with him for 2 hours. Now, that's 2 hours of out of time into a program that wasn't funded to do. That's not a part of the program, but I need you to save that young boy.
A Big Mac and a chat, a small price to pay to keep the kids from crime.
And if you were listening to that story on radio, the video from our two Nicks will be on our webpage. Check it out. Meanwhile, the government's announced what it calls the most significant increase in funding for Ministry of Youth Development programs in 20 years. The $15 million extra over 4 years will mean 6,800 more rangatahi get access to services. It'll also fund a youth worker pilot program aimed at boosting contact time with at least 360 young people with complex and urgent needs each year. And some goes on research for developing and tracking programs, including for marginalised communities. And joining me now is the Minister for Youth, Priyanka Radhakrishnan. Kia ora, Minister.
Kia ora, Lisa. Thanks for having me on.
15 million over 4 years, is that enough given the many challenges that some of our young people are facing?
Look, it builds on work that has already been invested in, and you'll be aware just over the last week there have been additional announcements.
Minister, I'm really sorry to interrupt you, but your phone line is particularly bad, and I'm wondering if I can just get you to move around a bit, because I'm sure you've got important things to say that people will want to hear. So,
is this any better?
Let's give it a go. So the 15 million is extra, I know, on baseline spending, but is it really enough given what's going on in our community with young people?
Yeah, look, what I will say is that, it's a whole of government effort to make sure that we're investing in services and various opportunities for young people, whether it's to help them stay in school or avail of those employment and training opportunities through apprenticeship boost and so on, increasing access to driver licensing as well. So it's a layered response, and together we want to make sure that young people are supported to be able to thrive.
Well, let's look at some of the detail from today. $1 million annually for a pilot program, basically. So young people with complex and urgent needs are going to get more contact time with youth workers. Yeah. So how much extra contact time does $1 million a year buy you? Are they going to get 5 extra minutes, an hour a week? Can you put a number on it?
Yeah, I can. So this actually funds youth workers, it's actually full funding for youth workers to work with these young people, and it will be 20 to 25 hours of contact time. So at least half of what we're funding will have to go directly in terms of contact time to young people. It'll be young people from different groups, including Pāti Māori, Pacific, young people from Pacific and Rainbow and disabled communities as well. What we want to find out...
So, Minister, that 25 hours, is that 25 hours extra per young person or 25 hours extra a year across all of these kids?
It's 20 to 25 hours per week with young people, and it's a shift because what NYD currently funds is contributory funding towards youth workers. This is full funding for youth workers to spend that amount of time with young people with additional needs.
And the increased access to youth development services, what is that?
Yeah, so look, I've been going around the country meeting with young people who've gone through some of these programs, and what they tell me is an increased sense of connection either with their whānau or with their communities. Young people from gang families who tell me that they've finally found a role model or a family through these support groups. So that's the kind of programs that we'll be funding, and that will reach an additional 6,800 young people.
Are program providers telling you that they're simply not funded enough for more face time with these kids? Because that's what they're telling us. They say sometimes they get a few weeks of a course and they want to rerun the course with the child or young person again, but there's no money.
Look, different youth providers operate in different ways in terms of their contact time with young people and the types of services that they provide as well. And really, in terms of increasing contact time, that's what that pilot is hoping to be able to demonstrate.
Are they telling you that, though, Minister, that they're not getting enough face time with young troubled children?
They tell me a whole lot of different things. FaceTime is one part of it, and that's why we're building the evidence around that. But equally, in terms of the types of supports or the types of services that are being provided to young people, there are some that work potentially better than others, and that's what we want to find out.
So specifically, what are you doing to address these youth-driven ram raids?
It's, again, as I mentioned, it's got to be a layered approach, and that's what we take towards youth development or youth support more broadly. So ensuring that young people actually have a sense of purpose. We know that COVID has impacted young people, in various ways through missed education, employment and training opportunities. So we're making sure that we invest in that.
So is this package announced today, Minister, and I'm sorry to interrupt, but this package announced today, is that your response to youth involvement in ram raids, or can retailers and people who are getting hit every single day expect something more from you?
To be clear, this wasn't announced in response specifically to youth crime. It is one part of the solution because it is the early intervention and primary prevention aspect of it. What we want to do is to support young people to not go down a path of crime. There will be various other supports as well. I've mentioned some that have already been announced because essentially what we want to do is to ensure that our young people have a sense of purpose, a sense of connection, and the support that they need, whether through their families or outside through youth services, to be able to succeed and not go down the path of crime.
Thank you for joining us, Minister. That is the Minister for Youth, Priyanka Radhakrishnan, and apologies for that slightly dodgy line there. It is 25 minutes past 5. Kia mau tonu mai. Stay with us. You're listening to Checkpoint on RNZ National. New Zealand could be in for a perfect winter storm of COVID, flu and RSV. The Director-General of Health has held a now rare press conference to present some winter modelling. It suggests a second wave during the winter months could see hospitalisations peak at more than 1,000. Here's our political reporter, Giles Dexter.
Dr. Ashley Bloomfield, in his first press conference in weeks, brought along a slideshow and a less than cheery prediction for our winter COVID forecast.
We've passed the peak, it seems, of the current Omicron outbreak, but we are preparing, as that earlier slide showed, for another potential peak during winter, and that could be quite high.
The Ministry of Health's winter modelling showed a large peak in August. It would coincide with the usual flu and RSV season, and hospitals are being told to prepare for the surge.
When it really peaks, in perhaps July or August, that's a pretty significant number of people in hospital with respiratory illnesses, including over 1,000 potentially at its peak with COVID alone. So, of course, all our district health boards and nationally we are doing quite significant planning ahead of winter.
Something that could help us avoid putting the pressure on hospitals and avoid that peak is getting vaccinated against the flu and COVID vaccine boosters. But the uptake of boosters has levelled off.
This is vexing us. We have been pushing this for quite a while, very hard, with advertising, and all the infrastructure is still out there to get booster rates up.
Vaccination rates for children have also tailed off. That's concerning paediatrician Dr. Jen Russell.
This winter might be a particularly difficult winter, and so it's really important that we try and take as much pressure off the healthcare system and try and keep as many people well from COVID as possible, and that includes children. So even though children typically tend to get a mild or asymptomatic illness, a small proportion of children can get seriously unwell, and it's those children that we're trying to protect.
Professor Michael Baker says there's one tried and true protective measure as we head into winter: stay home if you're sick.
This is still the almost the universal vaccine for infectious diseases. It's not technically a vaccine, but is the universal protection, is to stay put.
It's estimated around only half of the actual cases in New Zealand are being reported. And while the 7,441 cases announced today are in line with the rolling 7-day average, it's not as low as Dr. Bloomfield had hoped.
We thought our case numbers would come back to a baseline of around 3,000 to 5,000 a day. In fact, they seem to have bottomed out at around 7,500 a day.
The COVID response is a movable feast, but as Dr. Bloomfield prepares to hand over the reins in late July, one thing won't change. Even if that peak starts to hit while he's still in charge, the man who's led our COVID response says he won't reconsider his resignation.
Judo is back on the schedule at the 2022 Commonwealth Games after it was dropped for the last Games in 2018. New Zealand is sending 7 judoka to Birmingham, and there is a distinctly family feel about the team. Felicity Reid has more.
Jason Costa first fought for New Zealand as a 17-year-old. Now at 39 years old, Birmingham will be his swan song. Costa, who competes in the under 100 kilogram division, had a few reasons why getting selected for his second games was important.
I've been fortunate enough to go to 7 World Championships, but on the flip side, I've never qualified for an Olympics. So, for me, that was one of the things that I held out for with this Commonwealth Games, was knowing that I could go and be there with my wife and more importantly, be there with our whole team. And so for me, I think the well-deserved cherry on the top for me to finish my career on.
His wife, Moira, will also be at her second Commonwealth Games, competing in the under 78 kilogram class. She's looking to cap off her comeback from the birth of her daughter 4 years ago. Moira heads to the Games ranked second in the Commonwealth and in top form, having won gold at Opens in Africa earlier this year.
I think I did my first competition when she was about 7 months old. It was really hard to stay away, actually. I think it was always kind of going to be the thing where I came back to.
Their children will also be in Birmingham.
They do it harder than us, but they do it a lot better. They're so good at understanding what we're doing and why we're doing it. And, we're very lucky to have the family support that we do, that we do heat away. And, we just really hope that one day our kids look back on this and it inspires them to chase whatever they're wanting to chase in life.
Jason coaches Moira, as well as Commonwealth Games debutantes Hayley Mackey, Cody Andrews and Elliot Connolly. 28-year-old Connolly only arrived back in New Zealand this morning after honing his skills in France. He'll compete in the men's under 81 kilogram, and his selection for the Games is another chapter in his family's legacy.
I didn't actually enjoy doing judo. I did it because my granddad did it and he represented Great Britain. And I sort of only did it because my dad never really played sport and he wanted me to continue it on.
But Birmingham won't just be about the fun for Connolly, who has promised to honour his granddad when he wins gold. Another judoka who has her eyes on the medals is 23-year-old Quona Christie. At her first Commonwealth Games, the Wellingtonian will have the world's #1 competitor in her under 57 kilogram division. Christie sees the Games as a pathway that was meant to be.
I have this little, you get accreditation when you go to events. I've made one when I was 9 years old and it's my Olympic pass. So always been my dream. So to get to the Commonwealth Games, it's just so amazing, a pivotal point, in my judo career.
Coach Jason sums up the expectations of one of the biggest judo teams New Zealand has ever sent to the Commonwealth Games.
I think if our team puts it all together and builds up the way we are, every one of us can perform and everyone else can finish on that podium.
Today's judo team naming takes the total number of athletes currently selected to the New Zealand team for Birmingham to 32.
And that report from Felicity Reid. Kia ora e te iwi e haere ake nei e a checkpoint, the growing call for immigrant nurses to be on the fast track for residency. The big stink in Bromley, residents fed up with the eternal smell of crap from the wastewater treatment plant rally for a meeting with the mayor, and a cut price cook-up with serving curry. Yummo. Homai o whakaaro, we would love your feedback on anything you've heard on the program this evening. Text us on 2101, tweet us at Checkpoint RNZ, or the email address is checkpoint@rnz.co.nz. Time for the headlines now. Anei a iwi mina pita kōrero.
The co-leader of Te Pāti Māori is defending the decision not to stand anyone in Tauranga's by-election. He told Checkpoint that Tauranga is quite an unsafe space for Māori to be, with a leaflet drop in the city including threats to burn down many marae across the country. Rawiri Waititi says people trying to talk in te reo at public forums have sometimes been shouted down. The Health Ministry has admitted to being vexed by the country's stalled booster rates as part of its COVID-19 vaccination campaign. While 95% of the eligible population have had 2 doses, just 73% have had a third or booster shot. The Director-General of Health, Ashley Bloomfield, says his officials have been pushing to get the number up for quite a while and will continue as winter approaches. The Ministry is warning there may be a second COVID wave over those months, coinciding with flu and RSV outbreaks. The number of new community cases reported today is 7,441. There have been 29 deaths of people with the virus. Another 398 people are in hospital, with 6 in ICU. State media in North Korea says hundreds of thousands of people have shown fever symptoms, with 1 death confirmed from COVID-19. The official news agency says nearly 188,000 people are being treated in isolation after what it calls a fever of unidentified origin. It's thought the population is largely unvaccinated. More than a dozen emergency alerts have been issued across Queensland. A severe trough that dumped heavy rain on the state's north and west this week is moving south. There have been 150 calls to emergency services for help and 9 rescues from floodwaters. And police are seeking information about a serious assault in Whanganui. A person was badly injured in the Moana Duncan Street area at about 5 o'clock yesterday afternoon. The victim was taken to Wellington Hospital where they're in a critical condition. Those are the headlines. Our next news and weather is at 6.
Nā mihi iwi, no mai hoki mai. This is Checkpoint, ko Lisa Owen tēnei. It's time for the business news, ko taku hoa e nai ko Nona Peltier, who joins me in the studio. Okay, let's start with manufacturing activity. Have better numbers this month or not?
Not really.
Okay.
No, still slowing down and not really perked up, but we'd hoped that it would have by now. But supply chain disruptions are weighing on the sector. Labour market shortages is another issue. And so overall, not the best numbers. We fell 2.5 points to 51.2. That's still expansion, but when you look at some of the other underlying numbers, it's not so great because we had contraction in a number of other areas, and that includes employment, production, and deliveries. Those are not great numbers. Well, we'll see what happens on Monday when we get the Performance of Services Index. That's the sector that serves you services like haircuts and food.
Wow, if you had a buck for every time you said supply chain issues and labour constraints, you would be a wealthy woman, no?
I would.
Let's go to the Reserve Bank now and expectations of another big rate rise in a couple of weeks. Well, they're kind of dimmed slightly. Now, why is that?
2 words, recession and stagflation. Ooh, she says, what is that, you might ask? Well, stagflation is when prices are rising while economic growth is slowing. Terrible mix of factors for Reserve Bank to consider, because if you hike interest rates while inflation to curb inflation while the economy is slowing down, that could end up stalling the economy and even just driving it into recession. This is an issue not just for the Reserve Bank of New Zealand, but for all the world's central banks. And it's an issue that we're seeing played out in the markets with enormous volatility, especially, all the global markets are struggling with this. One thing we do know is that the United States Federal Reserve are committed to hiking interest rates. We'll see what happens. That's driving, of course, our dollar down. We've seen it sitting here, even though it has a stronger tone. A stronger tone at 62.5 is hardly to write home about, is it? I mean, that's not a great number if you're going to be traveling. Okay, though, for tourists and exporters. Good.
An incentive to come here.
Absolutely. And 90.9 Australian. So that's about where we were for a while now. And 51.2 pence. You might think that never budges, does it?
Well, one day a few weeks ago you came in with 52.
So, is that right?
I live in the hope of a surprise. Yeah. And the overall market performance?
The top 50 index is perked up a little bit, and that's possibly because Australia had a much stronger tone to it, as did Asia. I think that they're just basically, catching up with the volatility that's been upsetting the markets everywhere. So we fell only 9 points. Yeah, to 11,168. It's not bad.
Thank you, Nona. Nona Peltier with business news there. Frustrated Bromley residents suffering under the eternal pong of poo will get to air something else this evening, their grievances with the mayor and councillors at a neighbourhood meeting. The smell is so bad they say children can't play outside and their homes are infused with the foul smell of crap. It's rolling in from the local wastewater treatment plant in 2 large filters that were gutted in a fire last week. Work to remove the rotting material, sounds yummy, doesn't it, will begin next month, but it's too little too late for many who say they're living in unbearable conditions. Local resident Damien Alley is one of them, and he joins me now. Hi, Damien.
Hey, Lisa, how are you?
I'm well, but can you describe for me what the smell is like around your place?
Yeah, well, you nailed it on the head. Yeah, crap is the word. Pure stench, if you could imagine. If you've had a blocked drain before in your sewer system, you'd know what it really smells like. But no, unbearable. It's you can taste it, you can smell it. It gives you a headache. It's unbearable.
So just so people who don't live in the area understand this totally, Damien, you're not just talking about when you walk outside. What's it like in the lounge or any other part of the house?
No, so it's constant. So it's only a slight wind change, whether it's in Linwood or Woolston or Bexley or Aranui, right through to Horswell, Hornby. It can make its way to Fendleton. And the smell is just, you wake up and you just think there's someone done a shit in the lounge. It's putrid. It makes you dry reach. It's a very, very strong, close to an acid smell, actually, you could say, along the lines of sort of human waste.
And so how does that change your life and your quality of life? Because I've seen a picture of you heading outside. Explain to people what you do when you have to go into the atmosphere.
Yeah, so I just wear a mask. It's quite a serious mask. It's a charcoal filtered mask. Those days are quite often, if you could imagine. There's many a days you can't go outside. I mean, I'm lucky enough that I've been able to change my downlight so I'm not sort of open to the elements as such as in many houses on the east side or even further field and Woolston and so on. The stench just makes its way into your house. Windows closed or windows open, you're going to smell it. It's vile.
You've got kids, haven't you?
Yes, I've got 3 kids, 2 young ones that live at home.
Are you happy for them to be outside?
No, they can't play outside because you can't be outside with them. My 3-year-old just says, "Dad, it stinks out here," and that's that's what he says to me, "Dad, it stinks out here." So we just don't. When the smell's on this side of town, we don't play outside. There's no way of playing outside.
So this meeting tonight, what do you want to say or ask of the Mayor?
I mean, the questions have already been asked. It's the answers that aren't being answered, unfortunately. I mean, the reality is the Bromley Wildlife Reserve Park, which is the ponds which are adjacent to the sewer system, which should be pretty fresh water. That's a major part of this problem, if you ask me. Leanne Dazelle and the other government and council members, they'll suggest that this matter that's in the bottom of these the bottom of the 2 silos is rotting. I mean, we're all going to differ to argue on that. I mean, reality is there's 2 roads you can go down. One is by the ponds. I mean, that's putrid 95% of the day. The other is up beside the actual plant. Now, I can go down by the plant many a days and there is no smell. So, I mean, I would be probably one that would argue the fact that I would quite clearly, I'm asking the question, I'd like an independent review into the testing. I would like the air quality tested and I would like also the water tested to see what sort of, toxic waste is coming off the water. I would see on average on a day maybe 5,000 birds, up to 5,000 birds in that wildlife reserve on that lake, on the ponds. As of the last 4 weeks, I think the only thing I've seen is things floating in the lakes.
So what about your property as well? I understand in some cases you get a film on your...
Yeah, I would have to agree. I've just built a new garage and it's cladded in white iron, and I just checked that today actually because I did read that. This will have a lot of ongoing implications in regards to health. This will have probably a lot. I mean, this is the thing. What scientists are involved? Who's organising them? What information are they being told they can tell us and can't tell us? Christchurch has gone through a lot, especially with the earthquakes, and I tell you what, transparency is not something that you usually get when you're in arguments with the government or councils.
So best case scenario, Damien, what are you hoping for from this meeting?
I have to sell my property and move on, to be honest.
Sell it to the council if you have to?
No, they wouldn't buy it. No, out of this meeting, to be honest, I don't think there's going to be much come out of the meeting. All you can do is ask questions. We don't want people abusing them. Abuse isn't going to give you the answers of getting this fixed. A quicker time frame would be nice. I mean, people are talking, we want some rate rebates and that. I don't think rate rebates will be the answer as to fix this problem. If that's the case, you're just taking money off them.
So if you want out, Damien, if you ideally would like out of the neighbourhood because this is really not making life comfortable at all, you're likely to take a hit on your house price, right? Because everyone knows it stinks. So do you think that they need to offer some form of compensation or top you up if you were to sell at a lower price?
I think just get them fixed first and fix the problem and then we'll sell, So reality is it is a market. We probably missed the boat in regards to the good prices on this side of town about 6 months ago, which was pre the fire, obviously, November last year. So, I mean, hey, at the end of the day, as a resident living here for 35 years,
being part of local sports and local kids and stuff like that in business. We've been in business on this side of town for over 20 years. We probably just really want it fixed, to be honest with you. The problem to be gone would be nice. We understand it can't happen overnight. I mean, everyone would have to understand this is a major, and you could probably put it down to a natural disaster if it wasn't someone that was a fault of the fire. But I mean, even that hasn't been answered. How did the fire happen? We don't know.
Well, Damien, I do hope you get some answers this evening. Really appreciate you joining us. That is Damien Alley, who's from Bromley, and as he said, he's dealing with that stink coming from the water treatment plant. Unbearable in his mind. Kids can't go outside and play. Doctors, unions and recruitment firms are getting behind the call for nurses to be part of the new fast track for residency. Migrant nurses must be in the country for 2 years before they can apply for residency. However, the aged care sector, which is losing nearly half its staff each year to hospitals or overseas, is bitterly disappointed the government didn't bond overseas nurses to one employer. Ruth Hill reports.
50% of nurses working in aged care are overseas trained, and annual turnover is 48%. Aged Care Association Chief Executive Simon Wallace says his organisation was not consulted on the government's new immigration settings.
What we said to Immigration New Zealand at the end of January is that we wanted a 2-year period where nurses coming in from overseas to work in aged care are tied to the employer, so tied to a specific employer, so we can have those people working for us for at least 2 years.
He says, unfortunately, despite public statements by government ministers suggesting the 2-year work-to-residency pathway for nurses was designed to help with retention in aged care, that's not what they've got.
We had that clarified yesterday, and nurses cannot be tied to a specific employer because of human rights and employment law issues. So that's actually not very helpful for us.
Mr Wallace says there are 1,000 nursing vacancies in rest homes. That's 1 in 5 positions unfilled.
We are having to close down beds in the sector, and that means displacing older New Zealanders, uprooting them from their families and their communities. And unfortunately, those beds are closing down every day now.
Simon Wallace says many nurses leave aged care to work in hospitals where they're paid $20,000 to $30,000 more, and the government needs to move urgently on pay parity. Health recruitment specialist Kate Natras is shocked that nurses and midwives were left off the fast track to residency. The former registered nurse, who founded Tonics Recruitment 21 years ago, says she hasn't seen any evidence to show they skip the country as soon as they get residency.
I would say probably 90% of our nurses we bring across. This is a lifestyle choice, but it's a lifelong choice as well. So they want to be here for the long term. They want to bring their family up here. They want to become New Zealanders.
The health system is short about 4,000 nurses, but many maternity services are also at breaking point. The head of the College of Midwives, Alison Eddy, says even if you accept that overseas nurses are leaving aged care for higher paid hospital jobs, it doesn't apply to her members.
That's specific for nursing and for that sector, and I suppose, why are we paying poorly in aged care? Surely that's the issue. And why are we putting rules around midwives if it's not an issue for them? So it's unclear to me why that rule's been applied to midwives.
Mazeri says the health sector should have been included in any discussion over the new immigration settings.
No one really talked to the sector when immigration made its rules, and that does seem a bit odd.
The Doctors' Union is also rallying behind calls to include nurses for fast-tracked residency. Resident Doctors Association boss Deborah Powell says during the height of the pandemic, junior doctors at many hospitals had to work extra hours to fill gaps in the nursing roster.
Without our nurses, well, we just can't run hospitals, can we? And, those that work most closely with them, which probably is the resident doctors, know that as well as anyone else. We're a team, and, for a functioning system, we have to have enough of everyone. Nurses are a critical part of that.
Dr Powell says there's not a single part of the health sector that isn't struggling with workforce shortages. And long term, we need to train more New Zealanders for health work and give them the pay and conditions to stop them leaving.
Before the war, Moscow made 2 demands of NATO: don't ever let Ukraine join and return NATO forces to where they were stationed before it began its eastward expansion in the late 1990s. It's backfired because it looks like NATO is expanding. Finland's president and prime minister have announced they support a NATO membership, moving the Nordic nation, which shares an 800-mile border with Russia, one step closer to membership of the US-led military alliance. Russia has responded by saying it will take retaliatory steps, but it's unclear exactly what they will be. CNN's international diplomatic editor Nick Robertson reports from Finland.
In Helsinki, calm as leaders move the nation ever closer to NATO membership. A momentous announcement delivered without fanfare by Prime Minister and President. A 2-paragraph joint statement. NATO membership will strengthen Finland. Finland would strengthen NATO. Finland must apply without delay. On the eve of the historic announcement, Finland's president explaining why it's not a threat to Russia, but Russia is to blame.
We increase our security and we do not take it away from anybody.
The Kremlin's response: this doesn't make the world any safer. Russia's foreign ministry doubling down, saying they'll take military action if their national security is under threat. In Parliament, where the historic vote will happen, routine business continues, but lest Russia escalate tensions, calls for speed.
Joining to NATO should be as short as possible.
When the moment comes, likely early next week, Koskinen, a member of the PM's party, is sure the vote to join will carry easily.
The result may be around 180 out of 200 in favour of membership.
Politicians and public now, for the most part, in lockstep, wanting to join NATO.
People, of course, support, especially when Russia have attacked Ukraine.
Not just the invasion of Ukraine, but a history of rocky relations with Russia, spurring many here to reassess decades of neutrality.
I have a very old father. He's 96, so he was here when we had our wars in Finland with Russia. And he's been talking about, the Russians can come anytime. And I said, oh, my father, you're back in the 40s and take it easy. And they're not, yeah, you never know what the Russians, they can always come. I said, take it easy. And now I just had to say to him, well, you were right.
In a way, Finland has been preparing for this moment for more than a generation. They've been involved in plenty of NATO and other international military operations, from Iraq to Afghanistan to Kosovo, Bosnia, Lebanon. Just last week, British troops were training here with Finnish, American and other NATO soldiers. Finland's accession is expected to be fast-tracked. Nevertheless, the Nordic nation pressing its case with allies, mindful Russia is watching.
Finland holds solid democratic credentials that meet NATO's membership criteria and has a strong and credible national defence that is interoperable with NATO.
No panic here, and according to officials, no new Russian threat either. The starting gun, though, clearly fired in a massive geopolitical shift.
Predator-free Wellington has brought in a 4-legged reinforcement to track down the last remaining ship rats on the Miramar Peninsula. Efforts to get rid of weasels and Norway rats have been successful, and now it's time for the final swoop. Our visual journalist Samuel Rillstone has the story.
Forget traps and poisoned pellets. The last surviving rats on Miramar Peninsula have something new to worry about. Meet Baxter, the 7-year-old Jack Russell Corgi Cross. One of 4 certified rat dogs in New Zealand, Baxter and his handler Chelsea Price work for Zero Invasive Predators in the Franz Josef area. The rodent wrangling pair have been brought north for a new challenge.
It's really awesome to get to come and help out on projects like Miramar and see another environment, especially moving into these urban settings as well.
They're looking for ship rats, which can climb and live in trees. Baxter and Chelsea's role is to zero in on rat-infested areas, with Baxter using his nose to hone in on the best place for traps and monitoring devices. Chelsea says his tenacious Corgi DNA is perfect for staying focused.
Looking for rats, you kind of have to be a bit stubborn and determined, so he doesn't give up easily, which is really handy. He's a mobile detection tool, so we can get into all the scrappy places that are a bit hard to get to.
So how does he do it?
He'll walk ahead of me using the air or ground scenting for rats, so he'll mainly focus on like quite dense bits of vegetation where rats like to hide. He also like lifts his nose up to check up into the trees, see if he can catch any scent coming from that, and if he shows a bit of interest he might stand up on a tree or point at like a rat scat. He might wag his tail a little bit, and I just have to kind of really focus on that and try and build up a picture to see what he's trying to tell me.
Predator-Free Wellington has been operating on the Miramar Peninsula for over 2 years. Project Director James Wilcox says it's been more than a year with no Norway rats and weasels.
We've been told we couldn't do this, it wasn't possible, and yet here we are. And that's pretty amazing. But we've learned so much. You know, we've had to take basically all of the knowledge we started with, throw it away, and then build up from scratch again. It's been an incredible journey.
Since Baxter and Chelsea can't be everywhere, James and his team have given out chew cards to local residents as another form of surveillance.
I usually would pump a bit of peanut butter in there, and people stick that out, and things will come along and chew, so we can understand whether there are any rats there or anything else. So we just get people to put them out in their backyard for a week or two, and then take any photos. So that tells us there's a rat there, because it's just chewed a whole lot out of it.
James says he looks forward to having an amazing asset and colleague like Baxter for as long as possible.
The key thing is that with Chelsea and Baxter, their time is so precious. So there's, you know, every conservation project in the country targeting rats is going to be after some of their time. So hopefully we can. If we can continue to show them a good time, they'll want to come back and help us out.
The future of the Predator-Free Wellington project sees it set to expand into more urban areas of Wellington, from Orfero Bay through Berhampore, Newtown and out to the south coast. So Wellingtonians, if you think there's a rat in your area, you might just see Baxter hot on its tail.
And if you're listening to that story from Sam on radio, do go online and check it out. Baxter, the superhero there, cute to boot. You really do need to see him. Filling up the trolley is filling plenty of people with dread at the moment as food prices continue to rise. Supermarkets are vying for customers with price freezes and discounts about what's the best way of getting the most out of the food we buy. Our reporter Louise Tanuth and camera operator Marika Habazi went to find out.
The weekly shop is getting more and more expensive. Food prices last month were 6.1% higher than a year ago. Fruit and vegetables are up a staggering 9.4%. Meat, poultry and seafood up 8.1%. So how do you feed the family in a cost-effective way? Today we're meeting chef and food bank manager Sophie Gray. She's given us a list of ingredients to buy. Then she's going to make a cauliflower, chickpea and peanut curry. There are 16 items on the list to make this hearty and tasty meal, and all up it comes to $37.95. But about the vast majority of those things can be used again. That's things like ginger, coriander, garlic, brown sugar, tomato paste, rice, soy sauce and curry paste. The only things on our list that'll be gone after Sophie's cooked up a storm will be the cauliflower, onion and chickpeas, and they all come to a grand total of $7.78. We're back at Sophie Gray's place now. Sophie's the destitute chef and operations manager at the Good Works Trust Food Bank. With the bench full of ingredients chopped, we're ready to cook.
The curry that I'm doing, it can be made meat-free, but it's also a really good way of making something like, last night's leftover chicken. That's one single chicken breast cooked. Making that little bit actually go into a dish that will then serve 6 people.
That works out to be about $6 a person, and remember most of those ingredients can be used again, and a smaller family would have leftovers. Sophie says there are other ways to bulk up meals without skimping on protein.
The pulses add protein, iron, fibre, and they have no fat in them whatsoever. So they actually improve the nutritional profile of the meal. So you can then potentially take a little bit of the meat out. So you could buy 400 grams of mince instead of 500 grams. and be adding in your pulses into that.
When it comes to veggies, Sophie says frozen is just as good as fresh.
This particular little curry uses the whole head of the cauliflower, but it also uses the stalks and the leaves. So they have a nice sort of crunchy texture, and then they're nourishing, but we often just throw them away. Likewise, a broccoli, about a good third of a broccoli is stalk. So if you trim the coarser outer skin off and just slice it up, you can toss that into stir fries or whatever.
When heading to the supermarket, Sophie says her best tip is to have a budget in mind and stick to it. She says it's best to shop just once a week and avoid heading back for bits and pieces, and embrace the home brands. And there are also some tips for how to keep food.
Freezing things flat in plastic bags so you can see what's in them, and when you freeze something flat, whether it's soup or leftover rice or a casserole or something like that, it actually defrosts much more quickly. So getting some decent storage, whether it's a whole collection of screw top jars from an op shop or recycling plastic containers, that kind of thing, just really helps things that you can stack.
After about 20 minutes of simmering on the stove, the sweet satay smell means it's time for a taste test.
That was really tasty.
Good.
A warm and hearty meal to fill hungry toms.
But you can also taste.
And you can check that story out on our webpage. Looked absolutely delicious. Into not so pleasant topics, the stink in Bromley, the smell of the poo. Lots of people getting in touch. The Bromley poo pond stench is overpowering at Clifton Hill, this person says. Sumner, 10 k's away. Can't imagine what it's like for locals. Another person says, if this was happening in one of the leafy suburbs, I can assure you that the pressure would be put on the council and this would be resolved immediately. And someone says the Bromley stench is a civil emergency. Perhaps there's some MIQ hotels available where people could stay while Defence Army resources are used to quickly remove the offending substances. Another one says, this is 2022, not 1822 London. Truly revolting.
RNZ News at 6. Good evening, kia ora tātou. I'm Evie Ashton. Te Pāti Māori co-leader, Rawiri Waititi, is urging Tauranga residents to hold local racists to account. The party says it's too dangerous to stand a candidate in the upcoming by-election because of anti-Māori sentiment. Mr Waititi told Checkpoint there's firm evidence the city has become a racist hotspot.
The shouting down of one of our Māori wahine at a public council hui for doing a mihi in Māori and welcoming everybody, it happened in Tauranga. The racist leaflets that were dropped happened in Tauranga. So we have the evidence there to show there is a growing number of racists in Tauranga Moana.
Rawiri Waititi holds the Waiariki electorate, which encompasses Tauranga. A doctors' union is rallying behind calls to include nurses on the immigration list for fast-tracked residency. The head of the Resident Doctors Association, Deborah Powell, says that during the height of the pandemic, members at many hospitals had to work extra hours because of nurse shortages.
Without our nurses, well, we just can't run hospitals, can we? And, those that work most closely with them, which probably is the resident doctors, know that as well as anyone else. We're a team, and for a functioning system, we have to have enough of everyone. Nurses are a critical part of that.
Deborah Powell says there's not a single part of the health system that isn't struggling with workforce shortages. The Health Ministry has admitted to being vexed by the country's stalled booster rates as part of its COVID-19 vaccination campaign. While 95% of the eligible population have had 2 doses, just 73% have had a third or booster shot. The Director General of Health, Ashley Bloomfield, says his officials have been pushing to get the number up for quite a while and will continue as winter approaches.
This is vexing us. We're looking at that and in particular how we can get those rates up and our paediatric vaccination rates up, which aren't at the level which we want and we're hoping for.
Ashley Bloomfield says other countries have seen the booster rate taper off at the same level. Australia's Defence Minister says a Chinese surveillance ship has been tracked off the West Australian coast and he's calling it an act of aggression by Beijing. Peter Dutton says Australia has tracked the ship over the past week or so and its intention was clearly to gather intelligence along the coast near military installations there.
I think it is an aggressive act, and I think particularly because
It has come so far south. For it to come south of Exmouth is without precedent, and for it to hug the coastline the way in which it has and heading up toward the north.
Exmouth, about 1,200 kilometres north of Perth, is the site of an Australian naval station. The police are seeking information about a serious assault in Whanganui. A person was badly injured in the Moana Street, Duncan Street area at about 5 o'clock yesterday afternoon. The victim was taken to Wellington Hospital where they're in a critical condition. Anyone who has electronic recordings or CCTV footage or who witnessed the attack is asked to come forward so the police can piece together what happened. Some of the largest building firms in the country want the government to pick up the pace on suicide prevention measures. Construction has one of the highest suicide rates of any industry. The director of the construction sector accord between the government and the industry, Dean Kimpton, says discussions about making mental health support a requirement in government contracts are ongoing.
It is challenging, and I don't think anybody should shy away from that. How do you reach thousands and thousands of small to medium-sized enterprises? So there is a lot of work that has to go on there. I think we should just out that and acknowledge it.
Dean Kimpton says he doesn't want to let the private sector off the hook either, as lots of things could be done voluntarily. A government project aimed at boosting social housing in Hastings has been beset by delay. 200 homes were promised by the middle of 2020, but nearly a year on, the target's still a way off. The original target was set in December 2019, but by December 2020, just 24 had been finished. The total is now 122, still nearly 80 short. The government's state housing arm, Kāinga Ora, says the delays are due to COVID and supply chain pressure. Housing Minister Megan Woods says it's naive to think there wouldn't be disruption to the targets. And an extremely rare gravel maggot has been detected for the first time on a remote southwestland beach. A team of scientists discovered it in the Houtai Marine Reserve south of Haast earlier this year. West Coast Marine Ranger Don Neal says it's a small, inconspicuous slug.
The really pale colour of it is part of the reason why it was called Smeagol, named after the Lord of the Rings, the little character who lives underground in the Lord of the Rings and is very pale and doesn't like seeing the sunlight. So likewise, Smeagol, the sea slug, is a really pale thing that doesn't like seeing the sunlight. It lives down in the gravel.
Don Neal says maggots like this have previously only been found at Kaikoura and on the south coast of Wellington. That's the news.
I think I went and bought an extra frying pan with the extra money cleaned up.
Have you still got the frying pan?
No, not when they say non-stick, they lie.
Yeah, I'm with you on that one, especially if you use a really hard scourer. We golfers have had to be careful not to stand on them. They were all over my hat and crawling on my clubs. Well, we're going to the horse's mouth. Grey District Councillor and born and bred coaster Patrick McBride. Good evening, Patrick.
There you go, what an intro, eh?
Lately with Karen Hay every weeknight from 10 on RNZ National.
You're back with Lisa Owen on Checkpoint next. Right now, the short forecast from Met Service to midnight Saturday, from Northland to Waitomo, including Coromandel, Bay of Plenty and Taupo. Fine today, cloudy periods tomorrow and isolated showers developing from Auckland southwards. Gisborne and Hawke's Bay, mainly fine, some high cloud tomorrow. From Taranaki to Kapiti, including Taumarunui and Taihape. A few showers are developing tonight, turning to rain tomorrow afternoon. Fine weather for Wellington, Wairarapa, Marlborough and Nelson. Cloudy periods developing tomorrow, then scattered rain developing in the afternoon or evening. From Bulla to Fiordland, a few showers, rain with heavy falls developing in Fiordland tonight and then spreading north tomorrow. Fine today for Canterbury, a few spots of rain tomorrow morning with high cloud, then patchy drizzle later with the cloud lowering. Mainly fine in Otago and Southland, but rain about Stewart Island spreading north tomorrow morning, then easing to isolated showers. And for the Chatham Islands, partly cloudy, a few showers tomorrow. It's 7 minutes past 6. I'll be back with news headlines at 6:30.
Thanks, Evie. No mai hoki mai. This is Checkpoint. Ko Lisa Owen tēnei. Te Pāti Māori won't stand a candidate in the upcoming Tauranga by-election due to safety concerns. The party says a string of racist incidents in the city, including a white supremacist leaflet drop and death threats, have led them to opt out of the race altogether and in doing so protect their mana. But others already in the running say it's an insult to stereotype the entire Tauranga electorate as racist. Here's our reporter Leah Tebbit in Tauranga.
Absolutely. I am of Cook Island descent myself, but I'm white, so I have a lot of white privilege. I guess I walk in both worlds and I see it daily.
That's the response from one Tauranga local when asked if the city is a hotspot for racism. It's the phrase Te Pāti Māori President Shea Wilson shared when announcing the decision not to stand.
With the state of things in Tauranga, it's not safe. Tauranga has been a hotspot where there have been multiple issues, whether it's to do with treaty settlement and the return of different cultural sites, or whether it's been different events where Te Reo Māori's been used and people have been booed down.
The by-election is to replace former National Party leader Simon Bridges, who has retired from politics. Mr Wilson says the Māori Party did not often stand in general seats, but this time considered it. He says while he doesn't want to open his people up to any form of abuse while on this campaign, they will stand a candidate at next year's general election.
The big problem that we're going to face, and it's going to definitely happen next year as well, is there's already signs from the right that they will be using race as a political card, which isn't good enough.
Some Tauranga locals wholeheartedly agree their city is racist.
It's an old city, it's built on old families and not the Māori families that were here first. It's built on the white families that took it from there, and there's like this big generation that really is just, the sad thing is it feels like you're just waiting for them to die. So something can happen here.
But definitely, it's out there, and I mean, I don't actually know how it compares to the rest of the country, but yeah, it's definitely here.
Others aren't so sure.
Can't say for sure, but just my experience of day-to-day life around Tauranga hasn't shown that.
ACT leader David Seymour says the Te Pāti Māori claim Tauranga is a hotbed for racism insults an entire electorate. While in the city on the by-election campaign, Mr Seymour says it is ironic for Te Pāti Māori to group a whole electorate as racist.
They are doing exactly the thing that we should all be against, which is typecasting and stereotyping. The idea that, well, an electorate at least of 70,000 odd people should all be typecast is just disgraceful.
Mr Seymour's candidate for Tauranga, Cameron Luxton, proudly states he is one of the few candidates born and raised in the city. He admits there have been some racist incidents in the media, but says the Māori Party should be ashamed of themselves for casting the whole electorate as racist.
But these are small events. To blow that up to as a representative sample upon a whole group of people is just wrong.
The Labour Party's candidate for Tauranga, Jan Tanetti, says she is saddened by the news the Māori Party won't stand a candidate. She says locals have a right to feel safe, and it does not reflect the city locals know. The by-election is on June 18th.
And a lot of feedback on this issue. This listener says it's a tragedy to hear the Māori Party have had to weigh up the safety of their candidate and staff against a backdrop of the threat of racial violence in Tauranga. Another person says it pains me to say it, but I completely agree with Rawiri Waititi. Tauranga Moana does have a racism problem. It's not an undercurrent, it's there in plain sight. We are lucky to have commissioners running the council now. And another person says, history would suggest that the Māori Party won't be very effective as a trailblazer for issues Māori if it adopts the timid approach it has over the Tauranga by-election. It has allowed itself to be silenced by the actions of a few bigots. Not impressed, there must be something else going on, reckons Sarah. A new police retail crime unit is identifying and targeting some of the country's worst shoplifters who are brazenly stealing tens of thousands of dollars worth of goods. Retail New Zealand estimates there's $1 billion a year in losses from retail offending. The initiative was announced by the Police Commissioner late last year, but is only just up and running. Matt Turney heads up the unit.
Its main goal is to deal with the most violent and aggressive, most prolific retail crime offenders within the entire New Zealand environment, predominantly focusing on shoplifting style offenders. We have a criminal investigation branch that already, within the police, that already investigates burglaries and ram raids and things like that.
Are shoplifters generally violent?
That's one of the reasons as to why the unit was created. We've seen an increase in violence within New Zealand, and if we look internationally, there is increasing violence trends of violence coming through.
When you say you're focusing on the most hardcore, how many of them are there?
That number sort of varies, and we have a number of ways that we can identify the most important ones to sort of look at and intervene and make some kind of intervention with. To put an exact number on it is probably not really possible. We work in lists of sort of below 50 people, but the list is probably much larger than that. It's just that we've had to put things through some kind of priority queues and that kind of stuff to identify the correct people to use.
So are you saying that you're targeting fewer than 50, thereabouts?
Yes, we would definitely be targeting fewer than 50 at any one time, yes.
And what makes them your focus specifically?
Well, there's a number of factors, and we look at multiple software systems to identify the correct people. But one of the key factors is how prolific they currently are. So how many offences they've currently committed and how active they currently are in the existing environment. We then also put those offenders through what we call the Crime Harm Index, which takes a look at their entire criminal activity and gives them a score associated with the number of offences that they've committed, and then we'll rank them accordingly to that.
So it's basically a point system. The worse you are, the more points you get, and therefore you become a focus.
There are a number of ways to identify, but there can be, I guess in layman's terms, there could be a point system associated with it if you want to call it that. It's not quite that simple, but there is Crime Harm Index, which is exactly what that is.
So when you're talking about using software, do you know the identities of these people, or you just know it's the same person doing multiple crimes?
Often we will know the identities of these people. They've been identified via various shops previously. So other retail stores will be able to identify those people on that platform and say, look, that's Joe Bloggs. We know it's Joe Bloggs because we've previously trespassed him, or we've seen his driver's licence or something along those lines.
So why don't they get picked up earlier then?
That's a very good question. It takes quite a lot of work to collate it and to put it all together. That's why this unit's been created, is to really focus on those people.
And in terms of the value of the crimes that we're talking here, could you put a number on it?
Perhaps if I give you an example. So one of the nation's top offenders who was recently apprehended by West Auckland staff, Waitemata staff, predominantly operating in the countdown environment. He's been charged with in excess of 40 offences and a total cost to countdown of between $30,000 and $40,000. So some of it is quite significant. Some of the people that we're dealing with, individual occasions of theft from the big hardware stores like Bunnings or Mitre 10. It's not unusual for them to have a couple of $1,000s or more in one hit, particularly if they grab some of the expensive tools or things like that.
Ram raiding's retail theft, so why don't you investigate that?
The Criminal Investigation Branch investigates ram raids. It's a serious offence. My unit is in the sort of prevention side of that, so we're working with Auckland Transport and some other agencies to make it simpler for retailers to have some prevention measures.
So you're working on things like making getting bollards less bureaucratic?
We are, but it's not quite as simple as that. Unfortunately, bollards go into footpaths, and as we know, there's a number of infrastructure points under footpaths which don't always make it possible for bollards to be installed into those footpaths. So we can't just be that narrow focus that bollards is going to be the be-all and end-all. And I know that Auckland Transport has recently come out and said that they're doing a trial in St Heliers where they're going to look at a number of different interventions, bollards being one, but there are things like concrete blocks or planter boxes or the like that need to be evaluated.
Are shoplifters becoming more brazen?
The environment has definitely changed, and there are a number of reasons for that. Some of them are social, some of them are economic. But there's certainly some learned behaviour that's going on, and there's certainly some shoplifters are quite comfortable, and certainly the high-end ones are quite comfortable committing that type of crime and do react violently when challenged by staff.
Since this unit came into being, how many people have you caught or prosecuted?
None. And the reason for that is that I only had staff start in the unit last week.
What does success look like for this unit then?
Success looks like a reduction in reoffending by the offenders that are going to be dealt with. And the unit is modelled on a smaller operation that was conducted in one of the police districts, which saw about a 60% reduction in reoffending. And that's certainly what success looks like for us.
And that's Matt Tierney from the Police Retail Crime Unit there. It is almost 18 minutes past 6 and you're with Checkpoint on RNZ National. If you want another sign that the cost of living is biting, more than 850,000 Australians are juggling multiple jobs to make ends meet. It's both people in the main cities and regional areas. They're grappling with either the rising cost of living or they're struggling to find full-time work. The ABC's Eliza Borrello reports.
Donna Hawker lives in the small Victorian town of Avoca, 2 and a bit hours northwest of Melbourne. She's got 2 children and her husband both work 2 jobs.
Probably 5 months ago, I really sat down and thought about it and thought we're not getting anywhere really. So I thought it's better off to try and have another job and try and get ahead and try and save some sort of money.
The 44-year-old works a couple of days a week as a disability support worker and recently took on extra work at an after-school care program. Her husband is a relief teacher and also works casually as a farmhand. Donna Hawker says the family was better off financially before her husband's shoulder wore away and he could no longer work as a shearer.
We don't smoke or drink. We don't go out for tea. We have probably takeaway once a fortnight. So that's our way of trying to save a bit more money. I try and walk to the shops in town if possible.
At Duca, 2 hours southwest of Brisbane on Queensland's Darling Downs, Elizabeth Norton has been juggling multiple jobs for several years. The 38-year-old works 2 24-hour shifts a week as a disability support worker, earning about $580 a shift. Her second job is drafting cattle 1 day a week at the local sale yards.
The rent prices up here are ridiculous. So I rent just a small mobile home cheaply. But obviously it lacks, running water. It doesn't have a shower and a toilet. I have to use that down at the main house on the property.
Elizabeth Norton says high fuel prices have hit her hard.
It's just ridiculous now. I don't go anywhere unless it's to work, and I try to do what I've got to do in town while I'm there so I don't have to make any extra trips. Obviously fresh produce has gone up a bit. So basically just live off frozen vegetables. I'll do a cook-up. And, I can get a month's worth of meals for probably less than $100 if I just buy some meat and use frozen veggies and a bag of potatoes or something. And I think there's heaps of people out there struggling and, I don't even know what the government could do if they were willing to do anything.
Angela Jackson, the lead economist at Impact Economics and Policy, says the increasing number of Australians working multiple jobs suggests more people are probably struggling to find secure full-time work and the rising cost of living is biting.
We're seeing rents up, particularly in regional areas. So we have seen, over the last 12 months, the hours or the average hours worked across the economy go up. And I think that reflects the fact that real wages have been going down. And so people have had to work more hours to make ends meet.
A specially tailored housing project for Hastings is almost a year behind target. The government promised to build 200 homes in the city by the middle of 2021, but nearly a year on, they're still 80 houses short. Our Hawke's Bay reporter Tom Kitchen explains.
The government's state housing arm, Tauranga Ora, is doing most of these new builds, and things haven't been going quickly. The original target was set in December 2019. By December 2020, a year on, just 24 had been finished. It's now climbed a bit higher to 122. Tauranga Ora says COVID and supply chain pressures have both attributed to the delays, but its building partners have worked hard to minimise the delays. Te Tai Whenua o Here Taunga help whānau, in their words, move up the potama or staircase of housing in Hastings, going from emergency housing to rentals to ownership. Its chairman Mike Paku says it's hard keeping on top of the problem.
It just feels as though sometimes we're treading water and struggling to keep up with the demand, the ever-increasing demand.
He says what's happening isn't enough, but there's really only one solution.
We just got to keep on building more and more social housing. It's taken us 40 years to get into this position. It's going to take us a decade or two to get ourselves out of this position.
Hastings District Council Chief Executive Nigel Bickle agrees, saying it's tough to beat the growing demand.
Very hard to get ahead of it, but if you look at the fact that we've already delivered, since we've been going, over 100 new social homes, a bunch of papakāinga housing. We currently have something like 180 social homes under construction.
And it's not going to get easier. He says Hastings will have to build 7,000 homes in the next 10 years to keep up with projected population growth.
All of that's putting the pressure on to, well, how are we going to manage that growth? Because we know that we can't keep consuming greenfield space, and particularly as it relates to our fertile soils.
This could lead to more medium-density housing around the Hastings CBD. Housing Minister Megan Woods says the world's been through a lot since the target was originally set in 2019.
I think you'd have to be particularly naive or have been not looking at what's happening around the world if you thought that there wouldn't be some disruption to those targets.
But she says this hasn't stopped the drive of the government or those doing the mahi.
Nonetheless, the commitment by local people in Hastings and tradies and businesses has meant that we are getting those houses on the ground.
Many of the homes under construction, around 116 of them, are due to be finished by August.
The two teams that put the Pacific into Super Rugby Pacific will meet for the first time this weekend, with Fiji and Drua hosting Moana Pacifica in Sydney. The newcomers have already recruited local fan bases. Rugby reporter Joe Porter has more on tomorrow evening's historic match.
Moana Pacifica create history at Mount Smart.
Moana Pacifica beat the Hurricanes in March for their maiden Super Rugby win, with the Fijian Ndrua edging the Rebels earlier that month for their first victory. Neither side has won since, but they're both full of confidence heading into the first match of what the Ndrua coach Mick Byrne hopes will become a long-running rivalry between the two teams.
We've been looking forward to this game since we knew we were playing it. The two new teams that turned it from Super Rugby into Super Rugby Pacific go on show this weekend against each other, and our boys are really excited for that opportunity. And it is a clash of the islands. It should be a massive cultural experience.
Byrne believes the match in New South Wales has a similar feel to Rugby League's State of Origin, where it's often billed as mate versus mate.
Yes, they are mates, but I think they get a bit of respect out of how hard they hit each other as mates. So I think we're in for a pretty bruising affair.
The Moana Pacifica wing, Fijian Timothy Tavatavanawai, has many close friends and former teammates in the Ndrua, including blindside flanker Mele Derinalangi.
We've been roommates since back in high school. This is the first time to play each other.
And Tavatavanawai's whānau will be cheering him on despite their torn allegiances.
Family, like back at home, mum and the boys will be cheering back in the house. Got a TV set up, and some cousins. They'll can't wait to watch this game.
Both teams are realistically out of finals contention this season. The Ndrua coach Mick Byrne says next year anything less than a playoff appearance will be a disappointment, and he believes being able to play all their home games in Fiji will help their cause.
Our fans are massively passionate. I'm sure the world will see what Ndrua rugby means to the people of Fiji.
Moana Pacifica have been hit particularly hard by COVID disruptions and postponed games, but assistant coach Dale McLeod is confident they'll chalk up another victory before the season is out.
There's something real special brewing in our group. We're way ahead of where we thought we probably would be, and I would say a lot of people are starting to now think that every time we go on the field we're going to be a mighty challenge.
The former All Black wing and Manu Samoa coach Sir Brian Williams says the game will mark a moment that's been a long time coming.
When rugby went professional in 95, 96, to have the Pacific Islands left totally out in the cold of Super Rugby was a real kick in the guts.
Williams, a patron of Moana Pacifica, says he's satisfied with how both teams have gone in their debut seasons, and he's convinced they will become regular winners in the competition before too long. One team at least should have 2 wins to their name after tomorrow's match.
A British socialite and footballer's wife has faced a barrage of accusations in a court case she brought herself. Rebecca Vardy has accused Colleen Rooney of defamation after Rooney named her as the source of leaks about her and her family. Vardy's taken her to court, but in the process has had to make several embarrassing confessions. World Watch's Paulina Lau has more.
It's the football scandal gripping the UK. Rebecca Vardy, wife of the former England footballer Jamie Vardy, is suing Colleen Rooney, the wife of former England captain Wayne Rooney, for libel. It comes after Mrs Rooney claimed Mrs Vardy leaked her private information to the press. It's been dubbed the Wagatha Christie trial. Dating back to 2019, Colleen Rooney says she carried out her own sting operation, posting fake stories online, claiming they could only be seen by Mrs Vardy's Instagram account, which were then leaked to the tabloid The Sun newspaper. Mrs Vardy strenuously denies being the source of the leaks, saying several people had access to her accounts. The BBC's Charlie Haynes has been at the High Court.
Rebecca Vardy has been in the witness stand. She's been giving evidence. Colleen Rooney has just been feet away from her. She's been staring her down the entire time.
In several days of court hearings, it's been revealed Mrs Vardy's agent, Caroline Watt, lost her phone in the North Sea after being hit by a wave. It happened within days of the court ordering the phone be searched for disclosure. Mrs Rooney's lawyer says it's concealment. Today, Rebecca Vardy has denied it was standard practice for her to leak private information to The Sun via her agent.
David Sherborne. Now, he's been questioning Rebecca Vardy on news stories and messages she sent to her agent, a woman called Caroline Watt. Now, he says that these messages between the two are examples of plans to leak stories. In one case, he says that there was a plan to leak the story of a celebrity who Rebecca Vardy knew having an affair. He read out the messages in court. He said, "OMG, have you seen how badly Mrs F is behaving? Leak the story." Now, in response to this, Mrs Vardy said, "I was just joking when I said this comment."
Proceedings were halted twice today after cross-examination brought Mrs Vardy to tears.
In another exchange, she said that she had considered selling a story, but it was a fleeting moment and she decided not to do it in the end.
This trial is about reputation. Emer Hagan, a freelance writer and editor, says this isn't doing either woman's reputation any favours.
Both of them feel they've been wronged by the other. But I think reputationally, these are two women who, they enjoy having a public image. They've profited from it in the past. Totally fine. They use it for charity work as well. It is very important to them. And I think against the backdrop of the cost of living crisis at the minute, this case with two women, two mothers, from a PR perspective, wouldn't it be so much more beneficial to both of them to just end this?
The celebrity trial will be decided by a judge and not a jury, and it's expected to run for a week.
Well, that's about all we've got time for now. The Late News team is going to keep you updated throughout the night. And remember, if you missed anything from the show, you can find Checkpoint on Spotify, Apple, or as they say, wherever you get your podcast from. Have a fantastic weekend. Thanks so much for your company. Kia pai tōpō.
RNZ News headlines at 6:30. Kia ora tātou, ko Evie Ashton tēnei. The co-leader of Te Pāti Māori is defending the decision not to stand anyone in Tauranga's by-election, saying there have been anti-Māori activities from some people there. Allied health workers are walking off the job for 24 hours on Monday as last-minute efforts to settle their pay claim fail. New Zealanders have been warned to prepare for a resurgence of COVID-19 over winter. And Australia's Defence Minister says a Chinese surveillance ship has been tracked off the West Australian coast, and he's calling it an act of aggression by Beijing. Those are the headlines. Our next news and weather is at 7.
Tomorrow on Mapuna, world champion Wakama coach Kiwi Campbell looks ahead to the World Sprint Championships in England later this year. Dr Machu Ratima on how Māori values can help all teachers in the tertiary sector in Aotearoa and learning te reo Māori in the USA. That's Mapuna, tomorrow on RNZ National.
Kia ora, Julian. And I'm Brian Crump, getting ready for another Friday night on RNZ National. Of course, Friday night means Sonic Tonic night. And because it's Friday the 13th, a date often given over to superstition, we have a Sonic Tonic